children who were separated from their parents under the Trump administration are the subject of an intense effort and an all-of-government effort directed by President Biden to find the parents and reunite the families and restore our nation to its core principles and values. We appointed an incredibly talented and dedicated executive director, Michelle Barnett, to lead the task force. I am the chair, along with the secretaries of State, Health and Human Services, and the Attorney General of the United States. This is a full-time effort by talented and dedicated individuals, not only in the Department of Homeland Security, but in the other departments that I mentioned. We look forward to working with this committee, with other members of Congress, and harnessing the talent and resources of the private sector and community-based organizations in this effort. We have an obligation to find the parents and to reunite those families.
Thank you very much. Earlier this month, while visiting a FEMA vaccination center in Philadelphia, you expressed the view that a person's socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, access to transportation, or immigration status should not impact their ability to receive a vaccine. I could not agree with you anymore. Can you share with the committee how you are making that a reality?
Mr. Chairman, the issue of equity is a core foundation of the all-of-government effort to address and tackle the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic. FEMA uses a social vulnerability index that addresses the vulnerabilities that you identify in ensuring that the placement of the community vaccination centers address the issue of equity and equality of access to the vaccines. I will share with you that I participate, along with other cabinet members, in a weekly meeting led by Jeffrey Zients, who leads the all-of-government effort on behalf of President Biden. And the issue of equity and the emphasis on equity begins our discussions every week. It is uppermost in our minds, and that too is a core obligation of ours.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the way you've been accessible, and they've reached out to me several times. We've had several good discussions already, and I appreciate us getting off on the right foot. And I want to commend all the men and women at the Department of Homeland Security and all the subsidiary agencies for the great work they do every day. I encountered many of those this weekend in El Paso, where I started my career as a prosecutor and where I went after cartels. And I know from then, and I know now, that they're the frontline people, they're the frontline workers, and what the discussions you have with them really ring true. And after discussing things with them, I became that much more alarmed about what's going on at the border. And as we discussed yesterday in our phone call, I've got a series of questions that really require just a yes or no answer. And I would appreciate if you could just go through those quickly. If you could confirm some of these for me. First of all, do you agree that President Biden signed multiple executive actions on his first day in office to one, halt border wall construction, two, end the Remain in Mexico policy, and three, cancel asylum agreements with Central American partners?
I do, and if I may, Mr. Ranking Member, I appreciated our two conversations thus far and the spirit of partnership to which we are both committed. I share your background as a federal prosecutor, and I know we will accomplish a great deal together. May I just say one quick thing about the men and women?
Sir, if you can, but it could be very brief because I have several questions.
I will, because I share your tremendous pride in the men and women of the Border Patrol and in the men and women across the Department of Homeland Security. When I took office on February 2nd, 2% of the frontline Border Patrol personnel had been vaccinated. And what I heard, first and foremost, was the fact that their health and well-being had not been taken care of. We launched Operation VOW, Vaccinate Our Workforce, and over 26% of the frontline personnel are now vaccinated. And I know
Thank you,
that
Mr. Secretary. I don't mean to cut
Thank
you
you.
off, but I do have many questions. I do appreciate you taking care of the agents. That's very commendable. Also,
Thank
do you
you.
agree that Customs and Border Patrol encountered Border Protection encountered more than 100,000 individuals in February, which was a 173% increase from February 2020? Just yes or no?
The numbers with respect to February of this year are accurate, Mr. Ranking Member.
Thank you.
And
Can you confirm
2020
that
is not the.
Can you confirm that Customs and Border Protection's Donna facility was recently at over 700% capacity?
I don't have the precise figure. It was certainly over capacity, Mr. Ranking
you.
Member,
Can
and
you
we are
further-
addressing that.
Thank you. Can you confirm that Homeland Security has asked for volunteers to help manage the quote overwhelming end quote number of migrants at the border?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Mr.
Sure.
Ranking Member?
Sure.
Thank you.
Can you confirm that Homeland Security has asked for volunteers to help manage the quote overwhelming end quote number of migrants at the border?
We have certainly called upon the volunteer workforce to assist in managing the border, as we
Thank
have
you.
done before, and we have done in many circumstances to address the varied mission of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm
Thank you, sir.
extraordinarily proud of our
Thank you.
volunteers.
Can you confirm that over the weekend you directed FEMA to help receive, shelter, and transfer unaccompanied children from the southwest border?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. And FEMA was the same agency who was charged with its first nationwide disaster order in handling the pandemic and distributing vaccines?
It most certainly is, and it is extraordinarily capable in addressing the many challenges that we throughout the Department of Homeland Security and throughout the nation confront. This is
Thank
not
you.
the first time that we have deployed the fantastic people of FEMA to address different challenges
I
throughout the
understand, sir.
country.
Thank you. Can you confirm that in order to pay for the response to the surge at the border, it's highly likely that you're going to need a supplemental appropriations from Congress?
That is not certain by any means, Mr. Ranking Member, and I certainly will stay in close touch with you with respect to the financial impacts of the work that we are performing, not only in this mission set, but across the department.
Okay, now a couple quick questions. If you agree with the facts that we've set out, and I appreciate your candor, and you said earlier in your testimony that the situation at the border is undoubtedly difficult. Well, given the tremendous rise and surge of individuals coming to the border, wouldn't it be fair to call it a crisis? Because that's what your agents are calling it.
Mr. Ranking Member, first of all, if I may, I didn't necessarily agree with all the statistics that you cited. Mr. Ranking Member, I'm not spending any time on the language that we use. I am spending time on operational response to the situation at the border.
Okay, just two quick
that's what
questions, Mr.
that's-
Chairman. I know I'm almost done
That's
here.
what I'm focused on.
Despite our disagreements and despite the language characterizations, I want to talk about solving problems. And I just want to get a commitment from you of two things. One is that you're open to working with members of Congress, regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republican, to reverse the disorder at the border.
I will be a partner of members of Congress, regardless of party.
Okay, and lastly, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. Will you commit to encouraging the president to accept Leader McCarthy's well-intentioned invitation to discuss the border crisis? And I'd like to be there too, if I could, on how we could come together to fix it.
Mr. Ranking Member, I will defer to the president to how he believes he should conduct the meetings that he hosts.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes other members for questions they may wish to ask the witness. I'll recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority. Members are reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for questioning, and then mute themselves once they have finished speaking, and to leave their cameras on so they are visible. The chair now recognizes the young lady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much for your leadership. To the Secretary, it's good to see you again. We've worked together before. My time is short. My questions, I will try to be as short as possible. If your answers could be likewise. I'm outraged about the shootings in Atlanta. Thank you for starting out. We offer our deepest sympathy. 6 of those individuals seem to be Asian out of 8. What is the department going to be doing about, even though the investigation is not proceeded, what may be domestic terrorism or hateful acts, violent acts against communities like Asian Americans, which have seen a surge in hateful acts? Mr. Secretary, very quickly.
Congresswoman, it's nice to see you again as well. I won't comment on the tragedy of yesterday because it is under investigation, but we are intensely focused on the greatest threat that we face in the homeland from a terrorism perspective, as I mentioned at the outset, and that is domestic violent extremism, violence that is motivated by different ideologies, including ideologies of hate against particular social groups.
I appreciate it. I hope that we will focus on Asian Americans as we have done on other groups. And certainly we know that African Americans have been the target of white supremacy and white racism. Let me move quickly to the border and indicate to you, Mr. Secretary, that this administration has a border policy. I congratulate you for it. It is not a policy of putting children in cages, which we had to suffer for year after year on the Trump administration. There are no children in cages. So I would simply ask this. I applaud the utilization of FEMA, and I applaud the utilization of a policy. Can you succinctly say what that policy is as it relates to the border and your policy for moving children who are now moving to temporary sites like Midland and Dallas to a process where they can seek asylum and or go to their custodial representative in this country? Mr. Secretary?
Congresswoman, the border is secure and the border is not open. We are expelling under the CDC's public health authority in light of the pandemic, single individuals who arrive at the border. We are expelling families under that same public health authority, limited only by the capacity of Mexico to receive them. And we are not expelling children who arrive unaccompanied without a parent or legal guardian. And we are caring for their custody and their sheltering in HHS's responsibility to place them with sponsors so that they can proceed with their immigration proceedings and their claims for humanitarian relief under the laws of this country in a safe and orderly way.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And as it relates to COVID-19, our state has always been a hotspot, Texas. Let me quickly cite legislation that I have, a COVID Delivery Act of 2020 and 2021. Just want to emphasize the value of FEMA. I want to acknowledge Tony Robinson, Region 6 Administrator, and the Texas Department of Emergency Management. They've been working beautifully, but I want to emphasize that I think FEMA can stand up and do more as relates to monitoring shipments. I think they can do more by establishing an app that would help working with HHS to sort of monitor the vaccines as they're coming forward. And so I just want to be able to work with you on ideas of how FEMA can be more effective in the COVID-19 fight. Would you work with me on that?
I most certainly will, and I appreciate the recommendation and the request.
Finally, we are all aware of the horrible breach that came about through SolarWinds, and you mentioned it in your in your presentation. So I'd really like you to answer the question regarding the importance of having shared vulnerabilities, meaning that we have a system, and I, of course, have legislation, but I want to just focus on the concept of making sure that we know the private vulnerabilities and the public vulnerabilities and that they're shared under the umbrella of system. Would you comment on that? We need to know the vulnerabilities so that we can begin to address the vulnerabilities. We can't have that kind of major breach.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for that question, because it returns to a statement that I made at the very outset, and that is that the department is a department of partnerships. And the public-private partnership is especially important in enhancing our nation's cybersecurity. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, within the Department of Homeland Security, is on point for enhancing that partnership. And critically important to that partnership is the sharing of information both by the private sector and the federal government. By understanding the vulnerabilities, by the attacks that individual organizations suffer, by learning from them collectively, we will enhance our nation's cybersecurity, and that is one of our critical mission sets.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for the work of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security. Look forward to working with you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes, Mr. McCall.
On a recent confirmation. You and I think, have seen this movie before. In 2014, when I was chairman of this committee and you were deputy secretary of DHS, Obama called the surge of migrants at the southern border a humanitarian crisis, and he was right. And today, we're seeing another surge at our southern border. We've both seen this movie before, and we know the plot, and we know the outcome. As chief of counterterrorism and national security for the U.S. Attorney in Texas, I learned that deterrence does work firsthand. In fact, Mr. Secretary, you were a federal prosecutor in a border state yourself. And I believe that words do matter. I know you mentioned that maybe the language doesn't matter. I think words do matter. I think you sent exactly the wrong message when you stated, quote, "We are not saying don't come. We are just saying don't come now." That is not a message of deterrence. The Trump administration, in my judgment, did a masterful job in negotiating the Remain in Mexico policy and the asylum cooperative agreements with Central America. It was actually a foreign policy achievement, and it worked. Migrants would have to wait in Mexico for their asylum trial, and the border was under control. However, with the stroke of a pen on Inauguration Day by President Biden, these policies have been suddenly reversed and canceled. Cartels and traffickers see that the green light is on at our southern border, and the United States is open for business again. Again, the message is, come on in. Just like that, catch and release has returned as a policy of this nation. And so, Mr. Secretary, has the threat. Migrants are given a date to appear in court and suddenly disappear. The children are the victims, and the cartels are celebrating this victory. Sir, with all due respect, this administration has created this crisis by rescinding these agreements. And just yesterday, you said, quote, "We are on pace to encounter more individuals on the southwest border than we have in the last 20 years. That is staggering. And I appreciate your honesty. I agree with you. It is going to be the most we've seen in 20 years. You may call that only a challenge, but I call that a crisis. So I must ask this question. Why in the world did this administration and President Biden basically shred the Trump administration's asylum agreements with Mexico and Central America? This administration's actions have had a direct cause and effect on this humanitarian and border crisis. What was this administration and the president thinking?
Congressman, it's nice to see you again, and I'm very proud of the work that we did together when I was the deputy secretary and you were the chairman of this very esteemed committee. Sometimes the tools of deterrence defy values and principles for which we all stand. And one of those tools of deterrence that the Trump administration employed was deplorable and absolutely unacceptable. And if we want to speak of language, then let me speak of language. I will share with you how I define a crisis. A crisis is when a nation is willing to rip a 9-year-old child out of the hands of his or her parent and separate that family to deter future migration. That, to me, is a humanitarian crisis. And what the president has committed to, and what I am committed to and execute, is to ensure that we have an immigration system that works and that migration to our country is safe, orderly, and humane. And I will share with you, if I may, Congressman.
I was against separation of families as well, but let me just say this. By rescinding these, I think, I'm now the Republican leader of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So I look at this also from a foreign policy standpoint. I think it was a blunder to rescind these agreements which have created this exact problem and have put these children in jeopardy. And you're seeing the separation again. I think, what is happening down there, and you and I have been down there so many times, the kids, children, the babies down there, what a humanitarian crisis it is. I don't think it's a coincidence that on inaugural day, the president rescinded this foreign policy. And then all of a sudden, within February, we have hundreds of thousands of people coming in and a projected million by the end of the year.
Congressman, let me, if I may, make 2 points. One, in fact, we have seen migration surges before. 2019 was extraordinary, 2014, and before then. And the bottom line is, and this is something about which we all agree, the immigration system is broken and it is in need of legislative reform. And the president presented a bill, and there are bills pending before the House. And hopefully this year, and I am confident and optimistic that we will actually begin once and for all to fix a system that everyone agrees is broken.
My time's going to expire.
Gentleman's time.
Mexico policy again.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island for 5 minutes, Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for convening this hearing. Mr. Secretary, happy St. Patrick's Day. Welcome before the committee, and I want to congratulate you on taking over as the Secretary of Homeland Security. I certainly look forward to working with you going forward. Secretary Mayorkas, I appreciate certainly my colleagues' concern about border security, though I have to say I wish they had raised them with the prior administration instead of focusing myopically on a wall. But I'm concerned that we're losing real sight of the real threat that we face. Physical borders aren't the only thing that we have to be concerned with. We've seen in the last several months some of the most pervasive cyber incidents in our nation's history. What's more, these incursions into our cyberspace are at the behest of our greatest adversaries, particularly China. So, Mr. Secretary, I want to start out by asking you how you view cyber threats that we face as a nation.
Congressman, I want to thank you for your focus and your leadership on this important mission set. And as I mentioned before, I want to thank the committee for its support of our department and the infusion of much needed resources to CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. This is one of my foremost urgent priorities for the very reason you articulate. The cyber threats that our country faces from nation state actors as well as individual actors cannot be overstated. The threat to critical infrastructure cannot be overstated, and we've seen that in a number of exploitations in recent months and over the past several years. We have incredibly dedicated and talented individuals who are focused on it. The president has identified this as well as a critical mission set, and Ann Neuberger is an extraordinary appointment as the Deputy National Security Advisor focused on cybersecurity. This too is an all-of-government effort.
Thank you, Secretary, and I'm glad you touched on critical infrastructure. I'm a big proponent of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's work on risk analysis. In fact, I authored a provision in last year's NDAA codifying responsibilities of sector risk management agencies to support that work. Now, recent events, whether the cyber incidents tied to SolarWinds or Microsoft Exchange server or the frigid temperatures in Texas, have demonstrated how the failure of a few important assets supporting national critical infrastructure, national critical functions can have cascading and often devastating effects. So the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, on which I serve as a commissioner, has suggested the concept of systemically important critical infrastructure, or SICI, for lack of a better term, but as a framework for managing these risks. So, Secretary, do you believe that SICI, based as it is on work the Obama administration did as part of Executive Order 13636, is a useful framework for managing risk, particularly cyber risks?
Congressman, thank you. I do, and that is very much a subject of our discussion. And I really appreciate your focus on critical infrastructure. It is a subject that I discussed with the leadership in the Department of Homeland Security on cybersecurity just a few days ago, because that is indeed a critical area upon which we all must focus. And I really appreciate your work on the commission.
Thank you, Secretary. Also, the Solarium Commission believes that DHS is really the linchpin in helping to mitigate risk before cascading failures occur. Do you agree with this assessment? And how are you engaging with your fellow cabinet secretaries and the White House to better manage risk to systemically important entities?
Thank you, Congressman. Certainly, the Department of Homeland Security and CISA in particular has a key role to play in the federal government architecture. And as I mentioned earlier in response to the Congresswoman's question, the public-private partnership is key, and we are, of course, on point for that. I had a very important meeting with Ms. Neuberger just this past Monday morning, and we spoke about everything that we are doing across the federal government in executing the president's direction, that indeed we bring all resources to bear, because each one of us has different assets, different capabilities, and different responsibilities. This is really, it's not just an all of government effort. I think, as you have correctly noted in the past, it's an all of nation effort, because here in cybersecurity, we say that we are only as strong as our weakest link. And so I share your view that we must work, all of us together in partnership to address the challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know that my time's expired, but I believe that Congress, and particularly this committee, are key partners with the department to better protect SICI. And I hope this committee, Mr. Chairman, would hold a hearing on this important topic. And Secretary, I hope that you would commit to working with us to address this systemic challenge. Thank you, Mr.
Certainly
Chairman.
will.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service to our country. I have to say, though, that this meeting, this hearing, for many Americans watching, has been quite nauseating thus far. The carefully read, scripted statements. I'm not sure you're here to answer questions, sir. I suspect that you're here to present a prepared narrative to the inquiries of Congress. You had stated that we're not saying don't come. We're saying don't come now. I can tell you, my sources tell me they're coming now, and they're coming through the year. You look at the cartels have 2 million in the pipeline. We're absolutely looking at a 20-year high for illegal crossings at our southern border. Well, my colleagues across the aisle, not even mentioning the cartels. America's watching this. For God's sakes, we're going to blame President Trump. You mentioned a 2019 surge. Yeah, we had a surge in 2019 because the cartels were paying attention to the election cycle in 2018 when the Democrats took the majority. We had to use every available legal power to reestablish control in 2019. We did. We had this thing down to a manageable threat. What happened? We have a 2021 surge. Why? Let me just put it out there. What happened between the control that we had and what we have now? You had the election in November of 2020, and President Biden was inaugurated on January the 20th. Americans know, they get it. The cartels are paying attention. They've loaded up their pipeline. We got 2 million illegal immigrants headed our way, and I don't believe you have a plan to deal with it. And let me say regarding FEMA, if there's not a crisis or a humanitarian disaster at the southern border, then may I please suggest we take our FEMA disaster response teams deployed there and send them somewhere where they're needed, like my district in Southwest Louisiana, where there's still hurricane victims waiting on temporary housing. Let me ask you a question that perhaps you can answer, Mr. Secretary. Do you agree that the world is currently experiencing a pandemic? And does the world include nations such as Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Colombia, Venezuela, Panama, Cuba, China, Iran? Is the world experiencing a pandemic?
Congressman, let me assure you of one thing before I answer your question, which is, despite our strong differences of opinion, I look forward to working with you towards shared goals.
That's very kind of you. Are we experiencing a pandemic?
Of course, the world is experiencing a pandemic. Congressman.
Okay, we're experiencing a pandemic and we're experiencing massive surges of illegals crossing our southern border. You're the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Are we testing individuals in the facilities prior to their release into the United States? Simple question.
Indeed, and I have a very direct answer. Thank you, Congressman. It is indeed our policy to test individuals before releasing them, and
Are we testing them before or after their process?
We have a process set up to do so. And if you'd like, I can explain that process. It has 4 parts.
No, what I'd like you to do is just tell us. I have several questions. Are we testing these illegal immigrants that are being released into our nation? Are we testing them before or after their process? You said they're being tested, that you have a plan in place.
We most certainly do. There are 4 ways in which we accomplish the testing.
Okay, you're welcome to submit that in writing. I'm reclaiming my time. To me, I think the American people are witnessing a question dodged. The bottom line is illegal immigrants are being processed at the border and released into our nation that have either not been tested or tested positive for COVID. I don't think I'm going to get a straight answer from you. And I have another simple question. Do you believe that the policies initiated by President Biden since his inauguration have impacted the issues on the southern border and increased illegal crossing? Do you believe the cartels were paying attention all last year when then candidate Biden was messaging that he was going to weaken the law enforcement mission, provide some kind of a path towards amnesty or citizenship, process when the illegal crossings in a manner that was more conducive to their reception in the United States? He messaged that again and again and again. Do you think the cartels heard that? Do you think that maybe has something to do with what we're dealing with right now?
Congressman, I share a background with Ranking Member Katko and Congressman McCall.
My goodness gracious. I'm not going to get a yes or no out of you. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to submit my questions in writing because you're not here to answer hard questions, sir. You're here to repeat narratives that's been prepared by staff and attorneys. And I don't appreciate you dodging these questions. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield my time and submit my questions officially in writing to the Secretary, and I'm going to expect them to be answered. And if they're not, we're going to make some noise. I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that when a witness is before us, he should be given the opportunity to answer the question and not shout it over. So in that vein, I will try to do that. Mr. Secretary, we've seen a lot of criminality charged insurrectionists from the attack on January 6th cite President Trump's words as the reason for participating in the attack. For example, Garrett Miller, who was charged for his role in attacking the U.S. Capitol, said that I believe that I was following the instructions of President Trump. Robert Sanford, who has been indicted for attacking Capitol Police officer, our law enforcement, the people that defend us, as was just stated by the previous member, our law enforcement, that he attacked, told the federal agents that he followed the president's instructions and gone to the Capitol for that day. Mr. Secretary, is it fair to say that that extremist groups see President Trump as their leader of their movement?
Congressman, the events of January 6th are the subject of criminal investigations and prosecutions. So I would prefer, out of respect for the integrity of that work, not to answer specifically with respect to the January 6th event. But what we also are seeing, as I've mentioned before, is a growing and persistent threat, and that is domestic violent extremism that is born of different ideologies of hate, ideologies of anti-government sentiment, ideologies of racially motivated individuals. And that is what we are very much focused on here in the Department of Homeland Security, and their words do matter.
But you can't say whether the impetus for January 6th was the insurrectioners following President Trump.
It is not, Congressman, something I will comment on right now in light of the investigations that are underway and the evidentiary impact of anything I say.
Ever since November 20th election, we've seen political leaders echo former President Trump's baseless lies that the election was stolen. Can you please share with the committee how repeating and amplifying these lies inspires and encourages the same extremists who attacked the Capitol on January 6th?
Those pronouncements, Congressman, are not fact-based. They are actually in defiance of the facts. I think Chris Krebs, who led the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency during the prior administration, who did a superb job, and I have seen the results of his great work each day, indicated that based on evidence, based on data, that the election was conducted with integrity and that the votes were not manipulated.
So basically, the loser of the election was just really just playing sour grapes and trying to sway the American people to believe that there was something inherently wrong with the election. Is that correct?
Congressman, I focus on election security with our state, local, tribal, territorial partners. That is what I am focused on.
Okay, so the president's echoes were baseless. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest, for 5 minutes. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the American people are deeply disturbed with the ongoing crisis along our southwest border. CBP numbers just in February show encounters of over 100,000 individuals, an increase of over 170% from the 36,687 encounters in February of 2020. This issue is of growing concern to the American public, and this is not a political issue. We are seeing calls by many members of the Democratic Party highlighting what we are seeing along the southwest border. Representative Cuellar said earlier, we are weeks, maybe even days away from a crisis on the southern border, and action is simply not an option. Our country is currently unprepared to handle a surge in immigrants in the middle of a pandemic. We see Democratic Representative Vicente Gonzalez say, I can assure you it won't be long before we have tens of thousands of people showing up on the border. And it will be catastrophic for our country, for our region, and for our district. We heard just this week, Senator Joe Manchin. Senator Manchin said, whatever message was sent, it was interpreted the wrong way. It is a crisis. Oh, it is a crisis. I know in statements that you've recently made, you talk about how we are on pace to encounter more individuals on the southwest border than we have in the last 20 years. In February, there was a letter signed by over 50 members of Congress. That letter was sent to the president. A copy of that letter was sent to you. In that letter, the letter says, we write today to bring attention to the rising immigration crisis that is already beginning at our southern border, a mere weeks into your administration. That letter goes on to say, on your first day as president, you signed multiple executive orders aimed at dismantling the security of our border, rescinding policies from the Trump administration that were working as intended to halt the flow of illegal immigration, the Biden administration directives on stopping the building of border infrastructure, revoking policies aimed at carrying out interior enforcement, halting deportations for 100 days, and suspending the Migrant Policy Protections, MPP, have all communicated that our borders are open. We know that the February numbers of 100,000 individuals over 28 days works out to an average encounter of over 3,500 a day. In 2019, at the surge of the crisis along our southwest border, former DHS Secretary Johnson, who was secretary under the Obama administration, he was questioned about this. And just 2 years ago, he said, I know that 1,000 cases a day overwhelms the system. I cannot begin to imagine what 4,000 a day looks like. So we are truly in a crisis. Mr. Secretary, we are approaching that 4,000 number that Secretary Johnson described as a crisis in the summer of 2019. In the summer of 2019, both Republicans and Democrats came together. They recognized that what we were seeing, the surge across our border, was an immigration crisis, and it was a humanitarian crisis, and it was a crisis that must be addressed. We saw President Trump put forth policies that almost immediately began to address the overcrowding that we saw across our southwest border. And I will tell you, it is time that this administration do the same thing. In less than 60 days, they have completely destroyed what was a successful policies or rolled back those successful policies by the Trump administration. Mr. Secretary, I will close my statement to you with a statement made by former Secretary of State Colin Powell. Secretary of State Colin Powell had what he referred to as the Pottery Barn Rule. The Pottery Barn Rule said, you break it, you own it. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes for 5 minutes, Mr. Correa. Unmute yourself, Mr. Correa.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. You got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing, and Mr. Secretary, welcome. Let me again touch upon an issue my colleague brought up, which is the issue of COVID-19 testing at the border. Are you testing all the refugees? And for those refugees that are not turned away, for those refugees that may come into the United States for further evaluation of their case, if they test positive, do you isolate them for the requisite time to make sure that our communities are safe? I know you wanted to elaborate on those, the solutions that you have. So I want to ask you to please elaborate, please be succinct, specific, and factual. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. So we have 4 different ways in which we test individuals who come into the country whom we do not expel. We work with community-based organizations and local officials. We release them into those community-based organizations so that they are tested and quarantined there. And we provide 100% reimbursement through FEMA to the local entities and the community-based organizations, provided the state authority does not stand in the way. We work with states when those states have the capacity to test and quarantine. We are working now with funds appropriated by Congress to fund directly community-based organizations and local facilities to conduct the testing and quarantines. And when those three options are not available, we have now retaining a vendor to test individuals who are in CBP custody. And if in fact they test positive, we transport them to ICE facilities for quarantine before release. That is our 4-point architecture, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it with this committee.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Secretary, let me follow up on the refugee issue on deterrence, following our federal laws, values, principles, ending children in cages, the ending of children separation. I was watching Spanish news a few days ago. I watched an interview of a young lady, no more than 14 years old, that had gone to the border. She was stating that she had gotten raped by 7 men before she got to the US border. And we talk about deterrence, and I can only imagine the drivers that push immigration north, the dangers at home, the hunger. So my question to you is, when are we going to start? What are the long-term solutions to this problem? All of us agree this thing didn't happen 1 year, 2 years. It's been going on for a long time, more than a decade, 2 decades. What are the long-term solutions? When are we going to implement them? Thank you, sir.
Congressman, thank you very much. And I think that Jorge Ramos put it very powerfully on Univision, because I too listen to Spanish language television and radio, when he said that sometimes hunger is stronger than fear. There are 2 long-term solutions, both of which the president has acted upon, one of which is immediately before us, and that is to finally fix the immigration system in this country. The second is to address the root causes in the countries from which these individuals are fleeing, and specifically the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. We began to invest in those countries and address the root causes, and that funding was discontinued during the Trump administration. And the president is committed to restarting that critical element of an overarching approach to our border and the issues of migration that have challenged our nation for so many years.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Chair, I yield.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes gentleman from North Carolina for 5 minutes, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your appearance. Others have made reference to your March 1 statement. Quote, "We are not saying don't come, we are saying don't come now." And I'd add to that in an ABC News interview that day, you refused the suggestion to say do not come, period. President Biden has said, don't come, we're in the process of getting set up. And answering Mr. McCall, you spoke of the price of deterrence. And Mr. Secretary, are you prepared to say right now that it is wrong for people to enter the United States illegally?
Of course I am.
So it's wrong to break the law, right?
Of course it is.
And so
But
there
we
can
also,
never be
if
a
I may,
right time
Congressman,
to do
I'm
that,
sorry.
or to incite migrants to do that. Am I right, sir?
Congressman, of course it is wrong to break the law, and I dedicated 12 years of my career to prosecute lawbreakers.
Mr. Secretary,
Congressman,
I didn't ask for elaboration. Here's the question that I last asked you, because you answered the question. My question is, so there can never be a right time to enter the country illegally or to incite migrants to do that. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, if I may speak of the law to which you refer, because our country has...
I didn't ask you to explain the law, sir. I just asked you whether or not it would be wrong.
Mr. Bishop, we allow the secretary to answer your question.
He's not answering my question, Mr. Chairman. He wants to go.
Well, I don't want you to debate him.
I'm not trying to debate him. I just wanted to answer my question.
Well,
if I may,
Let me put the question again, and then we'll see if I can get an answer to my question. What I asked Mr. Secretary is there cannot ever be a right time to enter the country illegally or to incite migrants to do that. Would you agree?
A claim of asylum, an individual fleeing persecution by reason of his or her membership in a particular social group. A claim of asylum is a claim that is recognized by law in the United States of America. And an individual who makes a claim of asylum is not breaking the law by doing so. And
In fact,
as a law enforcement officer, I enforce the laws of accountability as well as the humanitarian laws that Congress